everyone, welcome to another episode of Understories with me, your host, Lindsay Fowler. This week we're speaking to Kimberly Pepper, an art consultant and advisor from Philadelphia. Kim is warmth and passion incarnate, and her enthusiasm for what she does permeated our entire conversation. She shares her journey from working in the arts to founding her own art consulting business, Avec, a year ago. In the early days of her business, she really doubled down on reaffirming and building relationships, the latter she attributes to her growth over the last 12 years. And what I loved about what Kim does in a somewhat meta way is this is her own creative art practice. Through connecting clients with artists and using storytelling as a tool for curating shows, she's practicing her own art form. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. Before we get started, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening to this. Tell a friend, and don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified about future episodes. This is our penultimate episode of this season, with our last episode coming out 25th of June. But don't worry, we'll be back again in September, so watch this space. And now, over to Kim. Kim Pepper, welcome to Understories. Thank you so much for coming on. For people who don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am an art consultant and advisor in Philadelphia, but I work all over the world. Basically, I have clients all over the place, which is super fun, keeps me on my toes. But yeah, I do art consulting, advisory, curation, a little bit of everything. So
How did you start it? How did you get into this?
I've always, in one way or another, been involved in the arts. I interned at art and science museums and went to an art magnet high school for fine arts, and did not foresee myself staying in the arts. It was always a passion of mine, but it's always one of those, like, where can you go? What can you do? I myself am not that good of a painter, so it couldn't be a profession. But I started out as a buyer and then a merchandiser, and so kind of got into more aesthetically pleasing, where I knew that was I love working in interiors. I love just making things pretty and beautiful. So it was always a passion of mine. And then it was just a funny happenstance. My husband and I bought a home in Center City, and I was walking to my office one day and saw that an art gallery named Curating Artists, based out of Europe, opened up the street from us where we bought our house, and we've collected work from there just from traveling. And so I stopped in looking for art and ended up meeting one of my dearest friends who opened up the gallery, and she was looking for a gallery director. And I left my job and started anew. So started as a gallery director with Curating Artists and did creative direction for the Philadelphia branch. And then, that was the best stepping stone learning. The whole, are you familiar with Curating Artists at all?
Not really, no. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Curating Artists they're in Amsterdam as well.
Okay. Where are they? Do you know where they are here?
Based out of Europe. So when we would have gallery management training, it's Aix-en-Provence in Marseille. My training was in Marseille. And so they really are kind of hands-on with curation, gallery management training. It was like the most fantastic base level that you could start at for the business side of the art world. And they work with hundreds, if not thousands, of artists at one time. There's hundreds of locations over the world. And at the time, this is about 8-9 years ago, there was 2 locations in New York, one in Arizona, and then one opened in Philadelphia. And so that's how it all began.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting. So their whole thing is about teaching people how to, like, the business side of running a gallery, how to actually, like,
for the people that work with them. It's also such a great stepping stone. It's their whole concept is making artwork accessible and a little bit more. They're working with fantastic contemporary artists, but at more accessible sizings and price points. So where that was fantastic was that my husband and I, who were always really passionate about the arts and loved collecting art, but like we were in our early 20s, we couldn't really invest that much. So when we would travel, it would be, oh, we can get this little like 5x5 inch, 10x10 inch piece of art, original art by a local artist. Or if it's not a local artist, it's an artist that's doing imagery of this in Sydney. If we went to Australia, like getting a piece, I always liked getting pieces of art when we traveled. So that was huge for me. And so it was just happenstance that it opened in Philadelphia of all places, right after my husband and I got married. And it was just like a serendipitous timing where I'm going to go for it. It's now or never. I can always go back to doing buying and get back into that kind of realm. There was always jobs available there within a lot of different companies in Philadelphia, anthropology, trade. So I took the leap there and then never turned back. So
how long were you? How long were you a gallery director there?
3 years. 4 years. 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And then moved into Morton Contemporary, was my next space gallery director there. And that was a totally different, we've opened that space right as the pandemic started. We were supposed to open there March of 2020.
Such a seminal time for so many of us.
Such a to open a business, especially, well, I mean, you joke about it, but in hindsight, for the art world, it was kind of such a pivotal time where people are in their homes, and you hear it all the time. I mean, I redid a bunch of, I'm in a different house now, but I redid a lot of spaces in my house. When you're home, stuck at home, people were investing more into their actual home during the pandemic. So it was kind of like you had to think outside the box to work with clients, but there were clients. So.
And so then you founded Avec a year ago, you said?
Yes.
So what was the catalyst for starting it?
So my husband and I, we moved to the suburb. We were in the center city for about 20 years. And then we moved to the suburbs for my son who just turned 6. So we moved to the suburbs, and I never saw myself living in the suburbs. It's one of those things where it's like, nope, raising my son in the city. But once we were out here, and again, it does have to do with the pandemic a little bit, just the rethinking of things, the relearning how to work with clients and engage with clients. And towards the end of my time at Morton Contemporary, we were doing a lot of art advisory services and art consulting services, and just engaging with clients in a different way. We're not relying on people coming into the space, but reaching out, going into people's homes, going into people's businesses straight off the bat. So with consulting, when we moved out to the suburbs, it was a whole new clientele base. When I moved out, I was meeting so many new, because everyone's moving to the burbs. So, right. So it just kind of made sense for me last year with my son. I commuting into the city. I was leaving at right after I dropped him off, if I could drop him off, and getting home, putting him to bed. So it was like that. You're a parent, you know what, you want to be home.
Yeah.
It was more like I was working. I wish I loved my job so much. It just wasn't getting that time with my son that we moved out to the suburbs for my son, and then I wasn't seeing him. Oh, it was a catch-22. Yeah. That was really the catalyst for why I ventured on my own, is to kind of have my own scheduling, and I saw a space for me to do this. So
yeah, we had the same thing when we were in London, actually, because what was part of the reason when we moved here as well was this idea of, we just felt like we were passing our daughter back and forth like a football. We just weren't seeing each other, and it was just like, what are we doing this for? Why do we choose this if we don't have to? So I understand. And so you made this move to set up your own business and with a new set of clientele. How's it going?
It's one of those things where it's hard for me because I'm such a planner. I'm learning to ease back a little bit. I like having structure and knowing what's going on, having like my calendar is booked. But with what I'm doing now, it's so, okay, next month is going to be a totally different venture. Oh, next month I'll be curating a show. The following month I'll be working on a potential project. And it just varies so often, which is I'm learning to love. At first it gave me so much anxiety.
Oh yeah.
But I'm learning to love the inconsistencies of it all. I'm really trying to lean into that. And so it's going really well for me now. At first, of course, it's the anxiety, like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And now, I mean, again, it's only been a year, literally a year. I launched May of last year. So, it is exciting. And it is just the support that people have offered, in sharing what I'm doing now. It's just been wonderful response and really awesome clientele and people that are supporting me. So,
I mean, that's an interesting point, really, because I think sometimes I think we talked about this a bit when we first met. It was when we talked about, it's like when you're first starting a business, it's that the importance of actually, you don't have to do it by yourself. You can reach out to people, you can ask for insights, and like, I don't know how many of us know that in the beginning. I think everyone says, oh, talk to people, but actually that whole experience is not natural. I don't think, to be like, oh, I'm doing this thing.
No,
buy from me.
Because then it's also like, oh, what are people going to be thinking? What are they thinking I'm doing? Like, what is this? It's like, and it was such, like I said, I didn't premeditate. The other tough thing about this was there was no pre-planning this. It was kind of like I got to a moment in February or March, and it was like, I can't continue this, like, this rhythm I'm in right now with the balance was totally off.
Yeah.
And so it's when I decided to do it, I just dove right in. There wasn't like, within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I was building, like, luckily I had the experience. This is where it's really wonderful with and I'll be so grateful forever for the experiences that I've had with Carte Artiste and Morton Contemporary, where I got to learn so hands-on, because we were kind of just learning as you go because of all the twists and turns with the pandemic and so I got to learn how to do websites, SEO work, doing all of our social, doing all of the things that take time. But I was getting when I was launching, like within 2 or 3 weeks, I had everything up. I did my logo design, and like, just from the previous experiences, I got to bring that all in. So it just, it just evolved so quickly. And the amount of, when I was asking very few people at first, because like, what do you think of this logo? What do you think of this? I probably showed like 4 or 5 people my website before I launched it, and got just such great feedback, constructive criticism, which I so appreciate when people aren't shy about constructive criticism. And I love getting it. Like, I love, like, oh my God, that's such a good idea. I didn't think of that. Let's change that. And that's so important, to be open to receiving the constructive criticism. So
yeah, I actually think that might be the hardest bit for me, is getting constructive criticism. Because I think it's like, I think there is maybe for me, it's probably a predisposed thing about not getting it right, or being a little bit embarrassed that you didn't figure it out. But actually, you're right. It is the most beneficial thing that people can give you. And also that's the beauty of it. It's like, you can decide to take it, or not, right? But it's like, actually having that external view is just it's so useful, as painful as it is. Like,
as painful as it is, the thing is, like, I know what I'm doing with curation. I know my strong suits,
yeah.
and I'm so open to what, like, when I'm winging it, I am winging it with launching. Like, that was the whole, like, like, just double checking people. Luckily, with my previous experience, I've met such great entrepreneurs and people with just a wonderful eyes along the way. So I trusted the people I was asking so much. And so I knew, and they're like, go a different direction. Okay.
You're like, okay, thank you. I mean, so I think like this probably shows my level of ignorance about the art consulting world, but I'm really interested in how it works. Like, how do you know you're on the client side, you're on the artist side? It must be a really interesting, what am I trying to say? Like an interesting place to sit between the two because you're acting almost on both of their best halves. So how does that work?
It works kind of. I mean, it's for me right now. It's wonderful. I'm mostly on the client side. I do work closely with a handful of artists, which I think I touched base with you on. That is that and that's why I work with so few artists, because I want to give them my all devotion. Let me represent you the best I can. But that's so tricky with client. I can't force a client, and I never would insist on forcing a client if they're not into XYZ, even if I think it's a great investment for them. And that's where it is dependent. Are you looking for something beautiful? Are we working with an interior designer looking something to fit the space, or looking for something to base your space off of? Are you looking for something to buy as an investment, or are you looking for just a piece of decor? It's a totally, that's where it takes me to a really great place with clients, sitting and really getting to know them, really getting to know what they're looking for, because that's the tricky part too, is deciding. There's such an overwhelming amount of art out there right now. It's tricky for people to be like, that's what I want. So we have to talk about the story, the why do you want, like, what are you really looking for here? Because it is a little confusing. Like, what do you want to spend your money on? What do you want to look at every day? What's going to make you happy? So it's a different. So with artists, when I'm working with artists, I'll push them as much as I can out into the world, and with clients that I think they'll connect with. But that's very different. I'm more client-based, looking for what the clients are really after, because that's totally different than working with the artists and getting them exposure and clients. So it's a seesaw.
That makes sense. So, I mean, that in itself is really interesting because you're dealing with, I mean, art is subjective, right? Beauty is subjective, right? So when you're working with clients, it must be a really interesting exercise to understand their tastes, understand what they're, like you're saying, like what they want to look at all the time. But then also if they bring in the interior side of it, like, Susan, who we both know, she was talking about how, she starts with the art. So it's, she's, sometimes often art consultants are brought in sort of later down for sort of the final bit. But it must be so interesting to kind of really start understanding that story. I mean, and finding pieces that speak to someone and being that person that can find that. I find that amazing that you can do that.
And that's where like, I've been doing this now for almost a decade. And it's so important to keep it's where we were talking about attending those art fairs, going to openings, really staying on the pulse of what's coming out, what's new. And not necessarily what's new, but what's coming or what's coming back. Like if you're working with a blue chip client, is this going to be available from XYZ? So that's where it's super important for me to constantly stay in contact with gallerists and artists. What are they working on? Can I get preview lists? Am I going to be the first to get to this opening? Because then I can be the first eyes for a client. It's eyes and ears for a client that most people don't have time to do unless you're so passionate about the arts on top of what you normally do. It's a it's a full-time job to stay on top of everything else. I mean, like we talked about the Christie's courses I'm taking. There's one tomorrow. There's a lecture tomorrow on photography I'm taking. There's constant classes and lectures and all sorts of wonderful programming going on. That's so important to stay on top of. So you can be knowledgeable and stay in the know of everything for the clients.
Yeah. Sounds fabulous. You get to just buy art for people and oh, this is amazing. Do you know this? Do you know that? It's fabulous. I mean, one of the things we talked about when we first met was I was really interested in the commerciality of art. Because to me, this is the space in which we tend to sit, which is kind of understanding the business of creativity and how creativity informs business. But I think what's interesting about what you're doing is like there's a market in what you're selling, right? And there's that conflict for the artists in the fact that they're making money from what they're doing, but then they're also trying to make a statement. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I thought that was really interesting in how you negotiate that and how you kind of, I mean, as you're saying with the artists that you work with, it's like, how do you push them a little bit, but obviously.
Well, it's following, and I hate to say the word trends, but it's following. That's where it's important to stay on top of and follow what is wanted, what people. It's almost like following this, like we were saying, the stock market, the real estate market, what people want. And you don't necessarily want to nudge the artist to do what people want. You want them to excel at what they're creating. And so I only work with artists that I truly, truly connect with on so many levels, so I can kind of understand where their process is. And I truly want to understand their process from head to toe, because it's so important for me and for the people that I work with to really share the story of the artwork, not just, oh, here's a beautiful piece, here's this highly desirable piece, here's this. It's so important for me to go into artist studios and see their method, so I can go into every single detail of the materials used. That's something that's really important right now, that with the artists that I'm working with, is be mindful of your materials. A lot of clients do want to have a story, and this isn't just acrylic on canvas. This is recycled materials on antique linens that came from the early 1800s, and it's used with like just there's stories in the material on top of the story of the actual piece. So that's always exciting to see and to share, and it lights clients up when they see that whole process. It's just a different way of connecting.
Yeah, it's I mean, the story is, I think more and more as we're heading into this more digital age, and the story becomes the thing all the time. Like, people want to know the story behind everything. They want to know your story. Well, I think it's just a tool for connection, right? For people to sort of understand the art, and I think it probably makes it deeper. Yeah, exactly. I love that. It's really interesting. So you've been going for a year now. What are some of the highlights that you've had so far since you've started Avec?
Gosh, I mean, my personal favorites are working. I mean, just recently in April, I worked with a gallery in Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, and putting on a 4-artist show, curating, selecting all the pieces. This one gallery in particular, it's called No Name Gallery in Chestnut Hill. It's not your typical, and this is backtracking on just curation and everything. All the spaces that I've curated recently, as of this past year, have not been your typical white wall gallery. We're not working in a white box. We're working in warehouse. I'm working in warehouses, curating shows for a warehouse, curating shows for this gallery in Chestnut Hill. That's not your typical gallery. It's in an old, gorgeous, historic home that you walk into all of these different rooms, which I'm seeing that's a big trend, especially LA and New York. They're doing these more salon style gallery shows where you can envision the work in your space because you're walking into an actual living space that's just being repurposed as the gallery. And so we worked with 4 artists, Scott Troxel, Dovey, Deborah Lawrence, and Nicholas McGallis, and we did a show called More Than Words, and it was such a play on verbal, like just text and being very literal and then being more subjective. People really had to think about the pieces as they walked through. That was one of my favorite projects we worked on recently. That's just like that's where I love to just tell a story, but it's a different way of working than one-on-one with, I love going into people's homes and then presenting them with options. Basically what I do, that's like a day-to-day thing, not like an event. A day-to-day would be going into a client's home and we'll do a walkthrough. This is just a generalized thing. We'll do a walkthrough. They'll show me where they want to either rotate art out, where they want to fill a space. I need this. You walk, because it's kind of hard if you have especially large walls. How do you fill it? Do you one large piece? Do you build a gallery wall? What's the most impactful way? So we'll walk through a home and then I'll go home. I know when I walk through the space, I'll have things in mind after connecting with the client, knowing their tastes. And then I'll go home and build it's literally building a deck. I'll go through and digitally inlay, usually about 4, not to overwhelm, 3 to 4 options on each wall, a digitally inlay to scale what the artwork would look like, and then do a profile of the work. Here's what the piece is, the artist, the story, the pricing, so people can make really informed decisions. So that's like a day by day, and it's so nice. I'll go into the city. I have clients in the city still, but the homes in the suburbs, you have all this wall space. So it's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
So that's a day. That's what I just love to do, is walking into people's homes and then showing them what could be. So that's basically the gist of what I can provide to residential. For more commercial projects, when I work with developers or architects, the fun thing is kind of what you were saying, is basing, which is what Susan does, basing your space off of the art rather than walking in and selecting artwork for an already made space. Is, okay, the space is blank. Let's start out with this piece and then work with an FF&E team and your lighting team and curate around it. Let's base the room off the art. So that's also just an incredible avenue to go down too.
I love that. It was interesting how I was talking to her, actually, because I think for me, in my experience in design, I've always been on the design side in practice, and art was always it felt a bit like an afterthought. I mean, it was important, but it wasn't like the main focus. But what I loved about talking with her and with you is like that kind of way of making the art a real focal point. It's like, how does it inform the room? How does it make people feel when they see it? Like, I just think it's an interesting way of looking at it. And I've experienced interior design where they just like, they try and take the colors from the painting and match it with the sofa, and it's like, it's not really that. It's more. No. It's way more than that. It's much more of a bigger story. So one of the things we talked about was, obviously it's like a new experience selling your services, selling your ideas, all that kind of stuff. What are some of the challenges around building your business to date that you were kind of surprising, that you were like, oh, I didn't realize this was going to be a challenge?
Oh, what we
Well, we talked a bit about the pricing thing, but has there been anything else?
The pricing has been super tricky, just as far as like, you go from working for other people and then your value is already set. And when you go on your own, it's like, I know what I'm worth. Like and I think I told you the one dear friend of mine who was like, Kim, your value is your experience. People, it doesn't matter. It's not the time, it's the experience, because it can go all over. So figuring that out was the biggest challenge. I got a lot of I asked, and that's when I joined the Female Design Council and did the Christie's courses. There were so many brilliant people that I met that were so open to giving advice off the get-go. So that got nailed out. The kinks of that got nailed out. Other challenges has just been my biggest challenge in the first year is literally just pacing myself, because launching, you're saying yes to everything. And so many people are reaching out. Kim, do you want to do this? Like, let's work on this together. Would you be interested in doing this? And just out of like, oh my God, is this my only chance to grasp on to something right now? Like, you don't want to say no to anything. So then the scramble and anxiety kicks in, and just to prove yourself, like to prove yourself to yourself and to others. And I've learned now just like, just pace, choose the right projects. I'm working on projects that I know I love and can give everything to. Because if you say yes to everything, I want to give everyone my everything. You don't want to disappoint. So even when I was saying yes to everything, I just wasn't sleeping. So, so now it's being more selective on, it's funny. I was doing an interview with someone, and it's like the art of saying no, the art of saying not now, or no, or let's circle back to this later when I can really give you everything and it's at a better time. So yeah, that's been a big challenge because I'm such a yes person. So becoming a no person has been it's been a blessing and a curse.
It's hard though, right? Like, it's hard to say no to stuff because you are, even if you're a yes person, but also it's like this excitement of what could be, the opportunity that might be there.
I see possibilities in so many things that it's like, well, rats, I don't want to miss out on this because but you have to be selective.
Yeah.
And that's what I've really did. It was I don't do New Year's resolutions, but it was literally when I got back from Art Basel in Miami in December, and it was like I was bouncing around doing 20 different things. I was working as I was on the trip, and then it was so much. And so New Year's resolution was just like, start saying like, not right now. You like putting things on hold. You can't tackle everything at once.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing to be able to say no. Like, you have to have the opportunity to be selective. It's such a it's so wonderful to have that opportunity that people want to work with you. And
I mean, that is obviously the crucial bit, right? So do you think that the relationship building that you started at the beginning when you first launched, and that has led to this sort of an influx being oversubscribed in the sense of people wanting to work with you? What do you attribute it to?
Yeah, probably just because like I there is so much excitement around something new, and I'm so appreciative of everything, and I do want to do everything. It's just pacing myself. That's it. And so I've really, over the winter and spring, it's gotten to such a nice, steady, where I feel like I'm just on a good rhythm now. But yeah, it was a wonderful problem to have at first, where it was just like a lot of people asking at once, but at the same, which is, if everyone was still asking at this time, it would be absolutely fine. It was when I was still just like figuring it all out as people were asking. I'm like, I'm still, this wasn't such a premeditated launch, that it was still figuring out stepping stones. And again, doing it on my own which is why it's so like getting into those organizations, especially the female organizations, where it's like, that community is so awesome. It's so wonderful. Again, the Female Design Council is so wonderful to have, because like everyone's on a WhatsApp group, and it's just all different creatives from all over. Again, taking all the courses and meeting other people that have been doing this for so long ahead of you. Again, it's a lot of the women that I've spoke to aren't necessarily doing the consulting side, but doing the advisory side. So I still have elements that I toss in there that are a little unusual, like the gallery curations and the exhibition curations, which is just a passion of mine. I know I could do that in my sleep. I love it so much. But yeah, that's that seems to be where I'm at right now, is like, now I can take it on, but it was when I was still figuring it out, it was just like,
Yeah, it's that whole thing about like, entrepreneurship is like jumping off a cliff and then building the airplane on the way down or something. I can't remember, jumping out of a plane. I can't remember how it goes, but that's exactly it. But I mean, but to be fair, I think I don't know very many people who start businesses with a business plan in creative in circumstances.
Too. That's exactly what was more reassuring to me. Like by the middle end of the summer, they're like, you know what you're doing. You had a business plan. It just wasn't written out.
Yeah.
Even though it was written out, I mean, I did. It just wasn't as because there's so many curveballs like that you aren't expecting.
Yeah.
So it's planning for the curveballs. But when you have such like wonderful, you surround yourself with good people and you're selective of who you surround yourself with, makes all the difference. Like oh my God, I'm so lucky with who was in my life at the time.
I love that. It's really true. I mean, but there's that whole thing about planning is that I always butcher this quote, but it's like Eisenhower, I think, said like having a plan is useless, but planning is essential, I think is how he put it. But it's this idea that you like, even just having the idea of what you want to do helps keep you focused, right? Because you can go off on any other tangent that comes at your way, right? Because there's so many variables outside of your control. But you kind of know what you're trying to get to.
It's like childbirth. It's like what I'll be going through in a couple months. With my first son, I was natural, had a doula, had my yoga ball.
You were like Earth Mother.
Days and had an emergency C-section, and all the plans went up in smoke. But the idea of the plan that I had a doula with me, like saved, like it was, you have your idea, the plan's not going to go the way. So with the second, like I'm doing 2 months and it's like everyone's, what's your, I have the baby. I'm having the baby. That's the plan.
Yeah.
But all the other, I can't plan it. So nothing's going to go the way I plan it. Didn't happen the first time. It won't happen this time. So just stay positive.
But they do say that though about childbirth, that if you go into it with a plan and it doesn't go to plan, most people get like quite annoyed when it doesn't go to plan. And so it actually causes more problems because it's like they have this plan and they're like holding too tightly to the plan. But there's a metaphor here, and I think in everything, it's like, you have your plan, but
I think that
happens
also
outside of your control.
Yeah, and it also is that I'm fairly optimistic. Yeah, but it's that also it's having an optimistic personality, an optimistic mindset, where I just said I'm a yes person in general, and so like even when things go, I'm just like, okay, it could be worse. It could be, you could.
Yeah.
So that mentality, I think, is very important. Is just as much as you want to have it go one way, go with the flow. Just you have to like deal with the changes and it not being what you thought it would be.
Yeah, it's easier to follow downstream, right, than to kind of try and keep paddling up and keep trying to force something. Yeah, it's hard, right? It's
so hard, but it could end up better.
Yeah. It could end up better than you think it will. That's something I'm definitely learning myself, is that the less I fight and the easier it becomes and the more chilled I am. But it feels so counterintuitive, right? Because you think that, I think I'm like, oh yeah, you got to work hard. You got to always be on it, be hustling, but actually it doesn't really serve very well in the end. Amazing. So as I mentioned before, so we always talk about this idea of like how creativity and business works together. How do you sort of incorporate your own creativity into your business?
I think it's always there. Just again, thinking out of the box, like I love interior design. So, and I think that's where I connected with Susan as well. Just like, oh my gosh, her business is awesome. Like it's kind of, I love just doing soup to nuts, all the little details, all the everything. And so the creativity comes literally when I'm working with residential clients, is you have to keep thinking outside the box, because again, going straight, this ties into finding something when it's not exactly your plan could be better than what you thought. And that's what I love to bring to clients, is like, this isn't what you thought was going to work, but it ends up being better than we ever thought it could be, just trying something totally out of the box. With curating shows, it's curating the whole experience. So you're just not, I literally do everything. And it's so funny. One of the artists I just worked with in the gallery, I just worked with, I'm not a huge like videotaping myself doing, which I should start doing more, because people love seeing installs and they love seeing that. I'm not in that yet. I'll try and get there.
You're preaching to the choir on this one.
The last gallery I just worked with, she was a photographer, and so it's in her blood to like document things happening. And so she was videotaping the install, the selection, how we're like sitting on the ground thinking about where things are laying out and how to tell the story through the rooms. And it was I'm so glad she did that. And watching that one reel of us, like, I went to go pick up the artwork, bring it to the gallery, unload it, lay it all out. Like, we're just imagining what's going to tell the best flow, how the pieces are all going to speak to each other. All the little details. Like, you have to be so creative thinking of all the little details. It's not just, here's some art, let's hang it on the wall and see what people think. People want to walk in and be like, oh, that's speaking to that piece. That's the connection with this. And it's all about just the full circle of bringing it together. So it does take a lot of thought process and creativity for that as well.
As an art history major, this is probably sacrilegious that I'm going to ask you this, and I should know this question. But I've always wondered about why people set art shows out the way they do, and why curators and what they're, sometimes the connections aren't so obvious. Maybe there's some storytelling, or maybe there's some, you have artists that were referencing other artists and you put them next to each other and there's kind of okay, yeah, I got that. But what are you looking for sometimes? I mean, I appreciate it's specific to the artist or whatever, but what are some of the things that draw you to putting certain pieces together?
It so depends on, it really, really depends on, I don't like, sometimes it's so literal. Like, there's one artist that I work with, Nicholas McGallis, out of Palm Springs, and we joke, like, he does the most literal pieces you can imagine. There's one piece that I love we worked on for the last show where it is a painting of a gorgeous seaside, and he flips it upside down, and in black, like, ink oil, he writes "Vacation's Over." And it's such a literal, like, my husband and I were joking, like, we should get that piece for our nursery for the next baby because vacation will be over. It's so literal, but there's overarching narratives to his work. I have so much love in my heart. It doesn't fit, the word fit doesn't fit in the heart, but it seems so simple. And you look at there's little details in his work. With the show, there's one piece where my child could make this, where his 7-year-old daughter literally helped do the piece. And it's one of those things with especially abstract work. When I was in the gallery, you'd see clients, well, I could make that. My 4-year-old could make that. It's a circle. And it's like, well, why didn't you then?
Yeah. Yes.
And so Nicholas will do these pieces. It's like, so like in your face. Well, you hear that saying so often, like, my kid could make this. My child actually didn't. You're collecting it because it's so beautiful. So like, I love little stories and twists like that, where it's really in your face, but you do want to read it and think about it. But I also love the twists and turns of just totally opposite pieces. How does this crazy abstract piece connect with this figurative work? And there's some kind of twist and turn, underlying story that connects them. It might not be obvious. You might have to read the biography of the artist and be like, right, oh, this is the connection. The story of the artist connects with this story of the artist. I love that. That's where I'm very into the background, the history, the method, and connecting pieces that way that aren't so obvious. But working in both realms is so fun to me. And then bringing both realms together is fantastic.
It's play. It sounds like play.
It exactly is play. And you have to just like, it's one of those things. I'll take notes. I'll take little, like, wake up and then I'll write little notes. And it's one of those thinking about it constantly and reworking it. But then again, when we say a plan, like, you'll go to hang the work the way you thought you envisioned it. And it could take, usually I like 3 or 4 days to do an install of a show, because you'll think it's perfect. You'll go home, hung it in 2 days, and you'll think about it that night. I always do videos and pictures so that when I'm at home, I can think about that space a little bit more, and I change everything the next day.
I'm sort of seeing this a little bit like it's a bit meta, isn't it, in a sense, because your canvas is effectively the space, and you're using your art as the tools to create the space
and the story. And so, yeah, it's pretty fun.
Marvelous. So I know it's early days for you, but what is the future hold? What does success look like for you?
A balance. Really figuring out that balance and working on more. I love doing smaller, intimate projects, but working on larger scale projects, which those can take. I work with a handful of developers and architects. One of the last events we had was geared towards developers and architects in an artist studio. But those projects, this is where it's like, I'm still even though I've been in the field for so long, what I'm doing is such a niche new thing for me that it does take years to actually the construction of a building to then the artwork. So I'm in talks with so many different people for future projects, knowing, and that again is a blessing and a curse. So I have time to plan that out. I'll have time to have this baby and then the project will be ready.
You are a planner.
The amount of people that are laughing where I'm like working on a show for October now. And I'm like, okay, the baby will be 2 months old. I'll have the air go on. It'll come, like planning ahead around the baby. But I love it. That was one of the biggest joys that I had when we lived in the city, was bringing my son to the gallery. He was a babe. I had again, I'm so fortunate I had that experience and worked with such wonderful people that allowed me. I literally had an ergo, brought my 4-month-old up to the gallery. I wasn't working full time, but we lived so close that my son he thinks about, he's so into art, and it's not just like a kid. He thinks about a process. He thinks about his materials. Oh. He loves color play. It's so fun. That I'm excited for the next 2, really getting my kids involved in this, because I can really, it's so wonderful. But yeah, figuring out that planning ahead, not too sharp, but like having the plans ahead, doing bigger scale projects, which are in the works right now. But it is that wait, when you're working on your own home, like when we were doing renovations in our own home, it's like things that were supposed to take 3 weeks took almost like 9 months. And so like you have to remind yourself, okay, that's what's happening here. Construction takes time. So yeah, it's a blessing and a curse that happens as well. For me right now, it's a blessing. And so I can premeditate and make plans for next moves, but yeah.
Love it. Well, we always end with some quick fire questions just to throw people off their game a little bit. So let's see. What's the most unusual source of inspiration you've had for a project?
I'm going, my son. like the naivete of a child, like that it's looking at it where you see like with a child's eyes, like, oh my gosh, something so simple can be so wonderful, not overthinking it. So it is funny. Yeah, getting that inspiration from a 5-year-old to that's the weirdest, which you wouldn't think for like the investment pieces, the money spent, the bigger picture, just going back to the basics for it. So
yeah, I love that. You're not the only one who's ever said they said that, oh, actually I had another person on the podcast who answered this question with their son, but if your business had a mascot, what would it be and why?
oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I named the company, it was kind of like a no-brainer, and doing the logo for my company was a no-brainer, like Avec. I wanted the art to be part of the process. You're with the art. That's why I loved the flow of that all together. Oh, I a mascot, I do not know. I honestly have never thought about a mascot for my business. I guess
This keeps people on their toes.
I don't know, but the whole process behind the name is to be with, to sit with the artwork, to be with, like to look with, to it's so it's a whole different, when people are just thinking, when we were saying generic artwork, it's to pass by, it's an afterthought. No, we want to, it's not an afterthought. So that was the point of the name and the logo. The mascot, I don't know.
My mascot. All right, we'll let you off that one. What's your favorite thing about your job then?
The people I work with, I mean, it has been so wonderful. The connecting. I knew when I was doing gallery direction and working with another business, you're so focused on what you're doing and building that specific business. I lost, because I was also then like, you're in it for so many hours. You're so focused and it's so wonderful, but you're losing the connection with other people, like the connecting, the dot building with other people. And now tomorrow I have to go drop off a piece to a studio and a gallery, and I'm messaging people in the other completely different fields. Hey, do you want to grab a coffee? Do you want to bounce some ideas off each other for this next project? I didn't have the time to do that before. So it's really, I really love the energy I have to connect and to build, because I didn't have the energy before because I'm so focused. Again, you love what you do, you focus on the one thing. And now it's focusing on really just building that network of great people.
That's a lovely answer. That's a lovely way to end as well, actually. So if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Instagram is so wonderful. I mean, I was never huge social, but Instagram has been so wonderful for people to follow artists that I'm really keen on, that my clients are requesting. It's Avec _art_ consulting on Instagram. And then it's just AvecArtConsulting.com.
Okay.
But Instagram really has been so wonderful, again, at connecting with the artist, with clients, and sharing all the goodies that have been for us. So
yeah, you put something up the other day that I really liked. I can't remember what it was. I just love the colors that was there. But yeah, I mean, you're in the perfect place for Instagram, right? Because you have all this beautiful work to point out and show people that you're involved.
So wonderful. So it's not like, again, I'm not selfies. It's not, it's all really the artwork, and it's art that it really, the pandemic changed everything. Like, again, with that as well, where you're curating, when people ask, how do you find artists? And it's so like, oh my God, we're finding artists for the Gap on Instagram. But that's why it's so important for artists to really have a beautiful presentation of what they do on social media, because people are watching. And which wasn't the case so much 5 or 6 years ago. But it is now. And it's such a wonderful place to connect and really see what you can do. Get the story of that isn't really on someone's website. Like you're getting live feeds, you're getting the stories, you're getting really the full gist of that artist or that client through social media. That is unexpected.
Yeah, it's true. It's 100% true. I think that's the strange thing about it is that, like, especially if you have a brand, you know, people want to know the story behind the brand. They want to know the people behind the brand. But it doesn't feel, I mean, to me, it feels very counterintuitive to be like on our business one being like, oh, this is like, you know, this person talking about this, but apparently that's what people want because they actually want to know who's doing the thing.
100%.
Yeah.
I do all the analytics of everything, and my website, it tells what I do. It's formal. It shows all the gist, but you want the person, like you're seeing the back, like the behind the scenes on my Instagram. Here we're walking through a VIP fair that like it's you're connecting with artists that you don't normally see. It's just a different, more personal connection on Instagram. So that's why I love it.
Amazing. Oh, well, on that note, I'll let you go. But thank you so much. It's been really lovely to chat with you. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks again to Kim for her warmth and candor. It was brilliant to speak with her about Avec and how she uses her passion for art to build relationships and tell stories that resonate. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, all those sorts of things. Episodes drop every other Tuesday. As I mentioned in the intro, this is our penultimate episode of this season, with our last episode coming out on 25th of June. But as I said, don't worry, we'll be back in September, so watch this space. Until then, be well. Understories was produced by Kill Outfields and Kieran Fowler. The music is by Avec, and the branding is by Joe Jones. See you in a couple weeks.